Good evening. When cities across China were sealed off to control the spread of coronavirus, it seemed a long way from home. But in Italy today, travel restrictions kicked in across the whole country, the like of which have not been seen there since the Second World War. People can only leave their local areas with special permission for work or health or other official reasons. Austria and Slovenia say their borders can only now be crossed with a medical certificate. Other European countries have banned flights. Passengers are stranded. And here is why all this is happening. The number of infections in Italy rose above 10,000 today. The number of deaths above 600, 168 in just the last day. Some hospitals are swamped. So no wonder, perhaps, we are witnessing the isolation of a nation.
The streets of Rome echo to the sound of another emergency. Paramedics responding to a suspected case of corona on a day when deaths from the virus rose to more than 600. A military curfew is now in operation. Soldiers drafted in to stop all but essential travel. This is a country taking desperate measures as the crisis deepens and the hospitals reach breaking point. Everyone must now stay at home. Even when they venture
the top of our capabilities.
Police patrols broadcast the latest rules. Everyone must now stay at home. Even when they venture out to the supermarket, they stay at a safe distance. Shopping here is rationed. Only 10 people are allowed in at any one time.
To Africa next. Burkina Faso in West Africa has confirmed its first 2 cases. The Democratic Republic of Congo has confirmed its first case. That means Africa as a whole now has 100 cases in 11 countries, very low compared with Asia, Europe and North America. And of course, different countries are using different tactics. Have a look at these pictures from Rwanda, where temporary sinks have been set up at bus stops in Kigali so passengers can wash their hands as they go about their day. Well, let's shift now from Africa to Asia, because in the Maldives, big tourist destination, 6 foreign nationals there have tested positive. 2 resorts are now locked down. We've been talking a lot about cruise ships, haven't we? Well, in Singapore, one called the Costa Fortuna has docked. Passengers have started to disembark. This ship was turned away from Thailand, turned away from Malaysia, despite the fact that none of its passengers, including a group of Italians, had tested positive for the virus. Meanwhile, in China, where of course all of this began, the news is better than it's been. For 5 days in a row, the city of Wuhan, the very centre of the outbreak, has been the only place in China to record any new cases. And just have a look at who's visited Wuhan. Here's the BBC's Stephen McDonnell.
We could well be looking on this in the future as one of the key turning points in the coronavirus emergency, the day that Xi Jinping went to Wuhan. That's because this is a message to all of the people in China that the emergency is pretty much under control. Now, why would they think that? Because China's most important person has just travelled to the most dangerous city here in terms of the coronavirus and the potential of catching it. And images of him walking around the streets, talking to people, will give great encouragement. And I suppose another part of the message is that if President Xi can be at work in those circumstances, well, why wouldn't we also return to the job?
Back with coronavirus here in the UK, a health minister has become the first British MP to be diagnosed with the virus. Nadine Dorries recently attended a Downing Street reception with the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. She confirmed that she started showing symptoms last week before receiving an official diagnosis on Tuesday. And finally, this is the Dutch Prime Minister. This is Mark Rutte, and he's showing just how hard it can be to break a habit of a lifetime. There he is, shaking hands. Now, just moments earlier, he's actually gone on television to tell the country's 17 million residents to stop doing exactly that, to stop shaking hands to help combat the virus. Minutes later, as you can see, he broke the new rule.
Now, there is one thing on which all countries are agreed. Wash your hands and ideally avoid handshakes. We've seen what's become known as the Wuhan shake becoming popular, people tapping their ankles together. The Greek Prime Minister has opted for this, a fist pump. Not sure if that's safer, is it? I'm not sure. It's definitely safer than what the Dutch Prime Minister did earlier.
Oh, sorry, dat mag niet meer. Sorry. Nee. Over. Ik moet er nog wennen. Zo, ja. Erg, zo'n gewoonte. Ja, dat mag dus niet meer.
Op dit moment stoppen we met handen schudden. Dus u kunt voet zoenen, u kunt elleboog stoten, wat u ook wilt. Ik zie op scholen allerlei prachtige varianten op het handen schudden al ontstaan. Maar wij stoppen vanaf vandaag met handen schudden.
Oh, sorry, dat mag niet meer. Sorry. Nee. Over. Ik moet er nog wennen. Zo, ja. Erg, zo'n gewoonte. Ja, dat mag dus niet meer.
Well, it's time now to take a look at some of the front pages from around the world. And unsurprisingly, the Japan Times leads on the coronavirus outbreak as the country tries to slow down its spread. The Japanese government has approved a bill that would enable Shinzo Abe to declare a state of emergency, essentially, in the country if needed. Now, similarly, here in Singapore, the Straits Times also focuses on the coronavirus. Singapore has ramped up measures to protect older citizens from the virus. Government-run social activities will be stopped for 14 days. Now, nearly 300,000 people will be affected from that.
Well, the virus is maintaining its grip on the rest of Europe. But let's take a closer look at the numbers. There have been 372 new cases in France in the last 24 hours. 33 people have died there. In Germany, there are more than 1,400 cases, with Angela Merkel telling members of the German parliament that 60 to 70% of the country's population will become infected. There have been 35 deaths in Spain, where meetings of parliament have been suspended and schools and universities closed in Madrid. And in the UK, another person has died, bringing the total number of deaths from Covid-19 to 6 and the number of cases to 382. Well, as Ashish said there, so far Covid-19 has affected the UK and continental Europe very differently. But a closer look at the numbers suggests the contrast might not be as great as it seems. Here's our science correspondent, Thomas Moore.
It seems barely conceivable that a country in the heart of Europe could be in lockdown in peacetime. Now, this is how Italy's cases have grown over the last month, slowly at first, but much more steeply. Now, that is the textbook epidemic curve. So how does the UK compare? We have many fewer cases and the curve isn't anywhere near as steep. But look back 2 weeks when Italy had the same number of cases as the UK does now, and the shape of the curves are very similar. So is an explosion in cases also our destiny?
We will see many thousands of people infected by coronavirus. That's what we're seeing in other countries. And the important thing for us is to make sure that we manage those infections and make sure that those individuals who are most affected, so our elderly people, particularly those with chronic underlying conditions, get into hospital and get treatment, and we support other people in the home environment.
It doesn't mean that deaths in the UK will match those in Italy. Here, 18% of the population is aged over the age of 65. In Italy, it's 23%, the oldest population in Europe. And as we know, the elderly are more vulnerable to this serious disease. So deaths in the UK could be lower. But the increase in cases has raised questions about the action governments are taking. France and Germany have a few hundred more cases than the UK, where we could perhaps be in a few days' time. Yet both countries banned gatherings of more than 1,000 people at the weekend. Here, the government says the time isn't yet right to restrict contact between people because, for now, the risk is too low to justify the disruption. But the government isn't sharing that evidence with the public. It stopped releasing information last week on how many UK cases are catching the virus here rather than bringing it in from abroad. By contrast, in Singapore, the public is given full details of the links between individual cases, where they picked up the virus and their condition in hospital. But cases in the UK are doubling every 2 to 3 days, and some attempt on social distancing to slow the spread of the virus can't be far away.
Italy in lockdown, public gatherings forbidden, tourist sites virtually deserted, and doctors give stark advice to the public.
Stay at home and be prepared for a kind of war, because we are facing a war now here.
In the US, a 1-mile containment zone is now in place around a New York suburb at the center of a large cluster of cases. The National Guard has been deployed in the suburb of New York in response to one of the biggest outbreaks of the coronavirus in the US. Schools and places of worship are going to be closed for 2 weeks in New Rochelle. The National Guard will help clean public spaces and deliver food to people who are self-isolating. The containment zone announced by the authorities is centred on a synagogue closed last week by health officials.
Rishi Sunak will deliver his first budget as Chancellor today, with the economic challenge posed by coronavirus set to dominate. It comes just days after global financial markets underwent some of their biggest falls since the 2008 financial crisis. Spending announcements on road and rail are expected.
With the number of coronavirus cases in the UK expected to rise, NHS England says it's scaling up the capacity for testing. This means that 10,000 tests can now be done daily, compared to just 1,500 at the moment, and confirmation of any positive results will be accelerated. More than 380 cases have been confirmed in the UK so far, and 6 people have died.